Hello, everybody. Good morning. Good to see a crowd already coming in. This one is going to be fun. This is a chance for you to ask Chris Skinner questions that I will not filter. I will literally ask whatever the hell you put in the comment section to ask Chris. And Chris will answer them knowing what Chris is like. So our poor producer is got his hands on the kill switch. This is going to be the most dangerous episode of the breakfast show we ever had. You put Chris and I on at the same time. So with that, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 50th episode. Oh my God, 50th episode of FinTech Insider, the breakfast show US. I'm Sam Maule, 11FS Managing Director, North America. I'll be your host for the morning show. Do let us know where you're watching from, what part of the world you are in, because believe it or not, Chris is in Poland when we bring him on. We'd love to know where you're at. If we got anybody else from Poland, please let us know so we give you a shout out. Please also share the link to the stream. You see that little share button down in the corner? Click on that thing, post it out there. Get your friends on here. Hit the like button, and please subscribe to 11FS on LinkedIn so you never miss a show. As always, I want to talk about our latest research report. The link will be in this post here. It is really done incredibly well. It's all about the needs of small to medium-sized business owners in the U.S. and how financial institutions can make propositions to better serve them. Head over to bit.ly/DIGIT-ASMB or click the link in the post. And we also have another research report that we put out a week or two ago. We did that with Plaid. Yes, the Plaid that was acquired by Visa. This report is about how open finance will shape the industry. You can get that report at bit.ly/Open Finance 2020, or lovely Bianca will put a link in the comments section. During the show today, Bianca, one asked, do not do any old man jokes to myself or Chris, which there's no way Bianca won't do old man jokes about Chris and I. First off, 3 news stories for the past 24 hours that caught my attention and should have yours. First one, MSNBC reports the UK posted the biggest monthly fall in GDP on record in April. According to the Office for National Statistics, GDP fell by 20.4% compared to the previous month, a sharper contraction than the 18.4% expected by analysts. This represents a 24.5% decline from April 2019 as lockdowns necessitated by the coronavirus pandemic hammered economic activity. In the 3 months up to the end of April, the economy contracted by 10.4% compared to the previous 3-month period, the ONS also confirmed, again, falling below analyst expectations of a 10% decline. So there you go. That's the situation in the UK. How about closer to home here in the US? Reuters reports that US household wealth fell 5.6% to 110.8 trillion in the first quarter of this year, as US stock markets were hammered by an escalating novel coronavirus epidemic, which has since pushed the US into a recession. The majority of the drop came from cratering US stock prices at the time. Data released by the Federal Reserve on Thursday showed. From mid-February through the end of March, an index that covers 90% of the market capitalization of US stocks lost more than 10 trillion in value. Over the quarter, the S&P 500's decline was 20%, the largest quarterly loss since fourth quarter 2008. Yesterday, the market dropped, I believe, almost 1,900 points, and today will probably go up 2,000 points because the stock market makes no sense. And my last story, TechCrunch reports New York-based fintech startup Wahid, I believe I'm saying that right, meaning one in Arabic, describes itself as a digital Islamic investment platform and as the world's first Hala robo-advisor. It has now closed a $25 million investment round led by Saudi Aramco Enterprises Ventures, also known as Wahid Ventures, a venture capitalist arm of the oil giant Saudi Aramco. I love this story, by the way. Again, New York-based. You think about what they've been able to do. This platform is currently run in the US and the UK, has more than 100,000 clients globally. It plans to grow in the largest Muslim markets, including Indonesia, Nigeria, India, and the CIS. The 3-year-old company has already received the license to operate in Saudi Arabia and aims to get regulatory approval in 20 countries. According to Crunchbase, Wahid has raised a total of $40 million in funding since 2015 founding. And I wanted to get that story in there because these are the type of companies that our guest, Chris Skinner, has been talking about for, good Lord, almost 2 decades now. I'm not trying to age you, Chris, but you have been doing this forever and a day. Thrilled to have Chris Skinner, non-executive director at 11FS, author, speaker, pain in the ass at times, funnier than hell. Chris and I will be talking about the book he published earlier this year and how the financial industries had to fully digitize the ways we work in a matter of weeks once the pandemic started. Hello, Chris. How is Poland?
Mr. Sam Maule, happy Friday to you. Poland's wonderful.
Poland is wonderful. The best meal I ever had in my life was in Warsaw. And this, she's a very famous chef over there. Evidently, she was like the chef to the King of Spain at one time. And her restaurant is like underground beneath this building. And it was the best damn meal I've ever had in my life. So, Chris, I'm assuming you have gained COVID weight. He's not going to admit it.
A little bit. But actually, I'm on my 86th day of learning Polish, which is a terrible language. It's too many Zs.
How is your Polish, by the way? Do your twins speak Polish and English?
No, I mean, I don't really speak Polish, but I can now read it. So at least that's better than it was a month ago.
Good for you. I mean, it's good to continue to learn skills. For those of our guests that have never heard of Chris Skinner, which if you've never heard of Chris Skinner, I don't know why you would be listening or watching this, because Chris, I'm just going to go ahead and say this. I'm not aware of anyone else that has been writing, speaking, and publishing at the rate that you have consistently over the past 15 years about fintech and digital. Me personally, I can't. You were actually one of the first bloggers that I ever read, and when I was living in the UK. I mean, you've been doing this. When did you write your first book? 2006, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a bit of a strange creature, I guess, but
yes, I agree.
I was doing a monthly column throughout the 2000s, and then someone said to me, "Will you start blogging?" And that was in January 2008. And just because of who I am, I ended up thinking, well, I'm going to write something every day, and I've done something every day for the last 12 years. So,
how do you do that? By the way, how are you that? What regime do you have set up to write at the rate you do?
Well, if I'm honest, Sam, most of it is easy in terms of when you're traveling and networking and conferencing. It's a little bit more difficult when you're stuck at home looking at a computer and thinking there's no news today. But even then, you know, there's something that crops up. So, for example, this week, my theme has been all about women in finance and technology and banking.
Yeah.
And it's just because there's issues and debates and discussions that appear all the time that are important. And even though we're all locked down at home, you know, the things that are important are still the same, which is how to get financial inclusion, how to get access for everyone to the network, how to innovate during a crisis, et cetera, et cetera. So those things don't go away.
And I do like the fact that you do focus in on what I would call micro topics. But the thing is, you just don't hit on them once. You'll go into something and then you will dig deeper than, in my opinion, most writers, speakers, authors that are out there in this space. A lot of people just tend to generalize and be all over the place. So, for example, Chris, I remember when you were calling out the banks in Turkey. Remember that a couple of years ago when you were like, man, you want to see some real change happening? You really see some folks embracing technology? Take a look at what's happening in Turkey. And I remember sharing that with some bankers here in the US, and they're like, that makes no sense. And I thought, oh God, here's Chris's number. Have him come in and talk to you about that. But again, you've done that over and over and over again.
But a lot of that's to do with the fact that because I'm writing every day, there's always something that I'm trying to delve into in more depth. And so, you know, the fact I'm living in Poland is because I have a Polish wife, but the Polish banks and the Polish retail financial system is actually far more competitive and innovative than most. So it's actually a pleasure to be here and experience this. But equally, you know, I spend a lot of time looking at India and China and other economies where people just approach things very differently. So I was quite surprised, actually, in that the last book, Digital Human, a third of it was all about Alipay and Ant Financial. And at the time, I knew that I was tapping into something that was going to be very much prescient for the future. But now, as we're in 2020, I can't believe, to be honest, how when you look at China, you know, what's happened there in terms of innovation in payments and finance, it's far ahead of the rest of the world.
I mean, you give that. I use a clip of you back when I was giving keynotes. Thank you, COVID. But back when I was on stage, there's always a clip of you, and I think it was from one in 2020 last year when you were on stage, where you talk about the daily transaction volume of Visa, and then you compare it to what's happening in China. And it's they're not even in the same realm when
No,
it comes to volumes.
I mean, on Singles Day last year, November 11th, 2019, Alipay was processing 256,000 transactions a second, and Visa does about 2,000. So it's 100 times the volume. It's just incredible.
And that's what, and again, I put that clip up. I just look at everybody and I let it resonate. And then I play it again. I've done that twice, by the way, Chris, and I get a lot of laughter when I do
You're very
that.
kind.
Yeah. But I mean, it is, right. It's one of those, look beyond your borders. I say that constantly on this morning show. Don't think you can just lift and drop a solution in, but know what's going on in the world. And that's why at 11FS, we love you, Chris. And that's why I've loved talking to you and having the chance to get you on a show like this, because you do walk in with a global view. And I think that's really what's looked for, because we'll talk about the book in a second, but you do a lot of work where I know you go and you'll sit with a bank board and just talk to them about what's happening and what's going on in digital. And correct me if I'm wrong, but they do want to know from you what's happening in multiple markets, right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's been interesting for me is, as you move around the world, to be honest, a lot of economies are leapfrogging the economies that we thought were leaders. So yeah. The USA, the UK, Europe, to be honest, are creaking under legacy infrastructures, whereas you go to many of the African nations, Nigeria, Kenya, or you go around South America, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina. And what's happening in these nations is they have just gone from no infrastructure of any magnitude to the internet. And that's what's amazing, isn't it? In that, we can learn a lot from countries that we probably historically thought were behind us.
So you talk a lot about this in your latest book. I think this is your 7th book. I've gone out and counted. I believe your first book was 2006. So I believe this is around number 7.
I can embarrass you, Sam. There's actually 16, but there's only 5 worth reading.
16? 16? Okay. You are embarrassing me.
About 9 of those were just produced as edited versions by other people. So there's only 5 worth reading.
Okay, well, the latest book is worth reading. Let's talk a little bit about this, because folks, believe it or not, back in April, 11FS and Chris were set up to do a book tour across 5 cities in North America to talk about this book, do live shows and everything else. Thank you, COVID. So that didn't happen, but the book did get released. The book's done incredibly well. So you can talk a little bit about the book, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I just got to the point I was getting fed up with a lot of other people who are commentators saying that banks are dumb and stupid, because I don't agree. I know a lot of banks and people in banks, and I know they're not dumb and stupid. I just know that they're finding it incredibly difficult to deal with the technological changes demanded for the internet age, because their bank's not geared up for it. Going back to what we were just saying about a lot of banks implemented technology in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then they've layered infrastructure over those technologies, and it's basically handcuffed them into the past. They're handcuffed by their heritage, and what needs to happen is to break those chains. And so a couple of years ago, when I started the latest book, I just sat down and I thought, you know what, there's some banks I think I really respect, and are trying really hard to adapt to the internet age and do digital transformation well. And so I just sat down and wrote the list, and I ended up with 5 names of the top 50 that resonated for me as ones that seemed to be, from an external viewpoint, doing digital well, which is JP Morgan Chase, BBVA, ING, DBS, and China Merchants Bank. And I reached out to them and said, can I come and talk to you about what you've learned? And amazingly, they all said yes. So this new book is a mixture of my decades being an old man, of experience, combined with what they said to me in these interviews, of which I performed, over 40 interviews over a period of 6 months.
And Bianca, if you don't mind, in the comment section, let's throw a link out on Amazon to Chris's book. Let's get some book sales going. We're good about that, Chris. No, I don't get a commission, by the way, people, on that, which sucks. But one of the reviews I love on the book, it's going to be Ron Shevlin. Getting a positive review from Ron Shevlin is a unicorn event in itself. And Ron said, and I don't like this because he just cuts to the chase, it's refreshing to see a book that helps instead of hypes. and I agree. And I like the banks that you picked. Can you give us a preview of pick one lesson and summarize it from the book that you can share?
Well, I mean, from the interviews, there were a lot of things being mentioned that are things that resonated with me. And bearing in mind that I've been doing technology transformation in financial services for a long time, so quite a lot of the lessons are things that I know myself. Like, you can't change an organization without disturbing the organization. You have to have a burning platform. But then if you have a burning platform, there's no point in saying we're all going to get redundant and sacked and have no jobs unless we transform. You have to then say, and this is where we have to go. So you've got to give a vision of where we're going to. So some pretty obvious stuff there. But one that actually really surprised me that I hadn't heard before was the fact that if a bank wants to digitally transform, the chief executive and chairman has to have the mandate to do business as unusual. And so you can't have the business focused on doing business as usual, delivering quarterly returns, shareholder value, profit, etc., and metrics, the same old. You've got to give the leadership team the ability to say, just focus on changing the company. Don't focus on delivering results. And that's a really hard thing to imagine any company being given that opportunity. But certainly of the 5 banks, 3 of them went through that moment.
All right. So I've got to get to the audience questions because I'm not surprised. We got some really good ones out there. So let's highlight these. So Corey LeBlanc. Hey, Corey. Corey's with Origins Bank down in Ruston, Louisiana, the Inked Banker. Everybody check out Corey. He'll be big on the speaking circuit, I think, pretty soon because I like Corey. He's really good. Chris, you've highlighted for years now the talk versus action and digital transformation and strategy within the FI space. I think one major problem with the advancement in the space often comes from the understood extent of digital projects. Often bank execs and teams believe that everything in digital is an all or nothing effort, and these thoughts are also forced upon some organizations due to a lack of control over the existing tech stack or access to an adequate sandbox environment. So here's your question. Do you believe that the overall control and understanding of iterative transformation and technology is a limiting factor in causing more talk versus action within banks?
Interesting question. I mean, I think the issue for all of us is to actually really internalize and understand what digital transformation and technology can do, because we've heard, and most people in banks have heard, the message around technology disintermediation, disruption, for so long, and it hasn't happened. So why do I have to take this seriously? And I think that's the biggest challenge, which is, whether you're a community bank or a global bank, why should the bank have to deal with change? What's the imperative? What is this burning platform for change? And is it big enough to really motivate us? And for many people, it hasn't happened. I mean, my regular rallying call and diatribe is that so many banks treat digital transformation as a project and allocate it to a function with a budget, rather than actually making it something that the leadership team has to champion and change as part of their own mandate. And I think that's the issue. How do you get the fire lit under the leadership team? And it is happening in some banks, just not fast and not enough.
Do you think COVID is a fire starter when it comes to this, to embracing digital?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'll give you an example. It's a very personal one, but I keep using it, and I have a whole presentation about it now, which is that my UK bank, just before the crisis hit, I was having problems getting access to their online service. They don't, for some reason, have a mobile app. And then their call center was based in India, and it shut down with 4 hours notice. And so for 3 months, I haven't been able to get online or on the telephone to the bank. And this is one of the major, largest British banks. Can you imagine that in any business, that they didn't have a backup plan? And when you talk to them, what their backup plan was is a terrorist attack. So we have a second office for if our main office is blown up. They had no backup plan for everyone being locked in at home. And now there's this rush to cloud. There's this rush to, getting everyone working from home, accessing via cloud-based services. And I talked to the cloud providers. I spoke to a couple of them in the last couple of weeks, and they've told me, so many banks are knocking on their door saying we now have to be on the cloud. It's kind of like, get me on the internet, get me on the cloud. And they're saying, you're at the back of the queue, my friend, because we're dealing with customers who have real needs who were here before you.
It reminds me of way back when, and this was a long, long time ago, people, but when I used to work for TSYS. TSYS is based out of Columbus, Georgia, southwest Georgia on the border of Alabama. And their disaster recovery plan at the time for their data centers, and again, one of the largest card processors in the world, was if there was a disaster, they'd go from their east data center to their west data center. The east and west data center were both in Columbus, Georgia. One was on the east side of Columbus, Georgia. One was on the west side of Columbus, Georgia. That's changed, everyone. So anyone that has card processing through TSYS, don't sweat it. But for well over a decade, that was the case. I still find that to be damn funny. All right, another great question. This one's from Kurt at Tab Bank. QR codes are having a rise in retail in the US. For instance, you can scan a code to review a menu in a restaurant as a response to COVID. Thoughts on QR codes penetrating the payment space in the US? Because we know they work fantastic outside of the US.
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, something that the current crisis is going to probably turbocharge a little bit, which is the move towards truly contactless payments.
Yeah.
In that we talk about contactless payments, but if you take the example of here in Poland, almost every time I use a contactless card, that's fine, but then I have to enter a PIN. In the USA, typically it's magnetic stripe and signature still, or if it is chip and PIN, it still requires ID check.
Yeah.
And Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, Android Pay. What's interesting about those is that they're all tied to the telephone manufacturer, and that's the issue, which is that we won't get to truly use QR codes or mobile contactless payments until we have a neutral payment system that's not subjective to your provider of your network or your service or your phone, and that's something that for those who study China, we know that that's happened. The latest figure I saw last year, 2019, is $45 trillion was transacted through WeChat Pay and Alipay, compared to about $120 billion in the US through Zelle and Venmo. So immediately you can see there's a huge dramatic difference. And the main reason being is that a QR code is cheap, simple, easy.
Yeah.
No merchant terminals involved. It's just a camera phone. It's so simple, and that's been exported to the African nations, to India, to many other countries. And in fact, what's interesting, and not a lot of people know this, as Michael Caine would say, but 6 of the European mobile phone wallets are now being run on Alipay and financial technologies using QR codes because it is so simple and easy and cheap.
There's nothing wrong with simple, easy, and cheap. The Starbucks app, forever and a day, right? As simple as it comes, and it just works. I mean, yeah. All right, another great question. This one's from Siddhar, founder out in San Francisco. Hey, Chris, I loved your post on the I'm Not a Futurist and your PEST model. So that's PEST, everybody, which is using political, economic, social, technology change to peer into the future. For those that haven't read it, can you briefly talk about that? Look at that. You got a super fan, Chris. Chris is going, damn, when did I write that? And
there you go. Yeah, we've got to be careful how you say pest.
Yes.
PEST, yes, absolutely. Yes. So, I mean, this is a model that's used by everybody who's trying to study what's next, and it's really to do with Michael Porter's forces of change. So the things that will make the world change are political, economic, social, and technological. And for me, it's very easy, because I'm a technologist, to look at the obvious technologies that will change the future, like artificial intelligence, biometrics, facial recognition, self-driving automated vehicles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're not ubiquitous today, but they're becoming. part of everyday life, and will be more so. I mean, one of the big things we'll see very soon is every airport you walk through, you'll have your face and temperature checked by technology. You won't notice it, but it will be happening. They've already got that in China. You'll see that in every airport around the world. So there's technologies that are obviously going to change the world. But the things that you can't predict are the political and economic, specifically those two. In that, for example, I keep saying this coronavirus pandemic is not a black swan. It was completely predictable.
Yes.
And people argue with me and say, yeah, but what wasn't predictable, Chris, is that every government would close borders and lock down. Well, actually, if you think about it, if the pandemic was predictable, then the reaction to the pandemic was also predictable. I've actually got a 2008 report from the World Bank that said that GDP would shrink by about 7.7% if a pandemic occurred, like the avian virus that they had back then. And that's exactly what's happening right now. It was predictable, but political and economic change is harder to predict because you don't know that you're going to have a Donald Trump in office or a Boris Johnson in office, or that you're going to have a policy that wants to break away from Europe or that wants to close borders with China. So some things are predictable, some things are not. And the reason I'm not a futurist is that I don't do this to predict the future. I'm not trying to predict the future. I'm trying to get an understanding of what the future might be for commercial purposes. So I'm just a commercial strategist. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to be a futurist.
I love that comment, Chris, because I mean that is a reality. So much of what's happening today was talked about ad nauseum on stages, right? I mean, I can pull up Bill Gates a million times over talking about something like this. We've had pandemic preparation that's taken place over in the U.S. over multiple cabinets, different presidencies, everything else. It's just, do you have the what's the word that I want? Chutzpah. There's a good word. That's a good Yiddish word, everybody. Do you have what it takes to actually address it? And you talked about that earlier when you talked about the leadership at banks and organizations, right? They've got to be given the freedom, and they got to have it's political to some extent, because internal politics are just as tough in banks as they are in Washington, D.C., by the way. It's like Rome, if you will, in the Senate. You've got to have the wherewithal to go out and be ready for this change and to actually set up systems for this. Damn, this goes by quick. This flies by. 30 minutes flies by. I mean, it really does. We've got several other good questions that are great. We'll make sure these get over to Chris. Folks, get the book. Chris was kind enough to share an early preview for me. I'm somebody that likes history. I'm somebody that likes not theory so much, in real cases, real use cases, real examples of what's happened. And Chris was able to get in the boardroom at 5 of the most successful banks across the globe right now. He talks about that in this book. So go out, order the book. All right, Chris, go out and see how many book sales you get in the next hour. Folks, that's it. Chris, where's the best place for folks to learn more about you? Go to Amazon to get the book, everybody, by the way. But where's the best place to learn about you?
Come and check out thefinancer.com, where I blog every day, linking to 11FS Fintech Insider and Fintech Breakfast and all the stuff we guys get up to. It's amazing for me, looking back over the last few years, to see that we live in a world that has amazing vision and ideas delivered by technology, and we just need to keep it going, guys.
Amen. I will tell everybody, I've got a routine every morning of things that I read, and in that list is Chris. So that just makes that easy for everybody. All right, that's this week, folks. It's wrapped up. It's been a good one. Everyone have a great weekend. We'll see you next Monday. I'm joined by Derek Zezto and Darby Simon. It's going to be a fun show. We'll get the list out of the full guests that we're going to have next week to everybody. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you taking time out every day, everybody. We really do. And we'll see you Monday.
Have a great weekend.